Hello, everyone. My name is Monty Onehouse, and for the next few minutes, I would like to tell a story that might help you, as the audience, enjoy history and historical sites. My presentation of the public history will be focused on the premise of what public history really is and can we, as historians and academia, find what is informative, factual, and acknowledges that public history can be found anywhere, anytime, as long as we are prepared to understand who and what our targeted audience wants. As an historian, I enjoy delving into the past and finding new ways that the public history sites, places that I am visiting, uses creative, context, and relevant ways that inspire different models to have a connection with their audience. I have had the rare privilege to be able to travel throughout the United States and the world. My military career took me to duty stations in South Korea, Fort Lee, Virginia, just to name a couple. At Fort Lee, I was able to visit the Petersburg National Battlefield, which was the site of a Civil War siege that lasted over 9 months and decimated General Robert E. Lee's Northern Virginia Army. In South Korea, I was stationed at the DMZ, which was the demilitarized zone, and had the honor of walking into North Korea and around the peace talks tables. While both of these are considered public history sites, some audiences are easier to negotiate than the soldiers of North Korea who have real weapons and real ammunition. No pictures were allowed, however, oral history can come into play. I have traveled to every state in the United States and have visited over 30 different countries around the world. Preservation of these public history sites are extremely important and costly. Finding what your audience wants is key in determining what is needed to tell the story and what can be left out without compromising each individual public history site. As quoted from the book Introduction into Public History by Lyon, Nix, and Shrum, historical work requires historians to study as much of the available evidence as possible, as an ethical practice to represent the past as fully as possible. The concept that we as historians need to emulate when visiting historical sites is whether or not that site is actively trying to put out factual information to its intended audience. There are numerous national, international, and state historical sites that I have visited while traveling for work and pleasure. Some of the more notable sites nationally that I have visited are the Statue of Liberty, the Memorial of 9/11, the Arch in St. Louis, Missouri, Alcatraz Prison in San Francisco Bay, and Yosemite National Park in Yosemite, California, and many, many others. Internationally, I have visited World War I and II memorials in Australia, New Zealand, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, along with historical sites such as the Forum, the Pantheon, and the Colosseum in Rome. What can be said of all these different historical sites was that they all tried to focus on narrating a story that the audience they were targeting would be able to identify and digest the many different causal effects that arose from the narration. Developing the big idea thesis statement is paramount in targeting your audience and not confusing them with objectives or topics. This prelude was me setting up the big idea so that I could concentrate on developing the narrative as a historian. My wife and I were on an 18-day cruise that originated in Sydney, Australia, and went to Singapore. Along the way, we had stops in Bali, Bangkok, Thailand, and Vietnam. The stop in communist Vietnam was Ho Chi Minh City, formerly known as Saigon. This is where my story or narrative changed. The target audience was not the tourists from other countries like myself, but the people of Vietnam itself. In all the other historical sites that I have been to, the narrative was read through my eyes as the conquering and elitist American. The plaques and memorials at the old American embassy were told through the eyes of the victorious North Vietnamese army. The narrative had changed. The fall of Saigon in 1975 is eerily reminiscent to America's withdrawal from Afghanistan earlier this year. As I toured this historical site with rusting Huey helicopters and deuce-and-a-half trucks and jeeps with bullet holes and smashed windshields, the story was not of missed machinery and equipment. However, the story was of triumph, North Vietnamese triumph. This old American embassy in Saigon was also a South Vietnamese torture chamber and prison for those that had helped the Americans in any way. This historical site, with all of its macabre depictions of torture and death, showed me that the historians that set up this site used their knowledge of the Vietnam War to produce a narrative that encompassed multiple audiences with different causes and context. With many historical site visitors, getting your audience is not as problematic as keeping them interested. As historians, we tend to look at sites that interested us from the beginning. However, keeping that attention is harder to predict and control. Each historical site, whether a museum, archive, library, church, it is imperative that too much information can be as harmful as not enough. There are 3 degrees of audience that visit an historical site. First, there are those that read everything about every exhibit. Secondly, those that skim the narrative to get as much as possible and then move on to the next exhibit. And thirdly, those that want to look at an exhibit only and not read anything about the context or causality of that exhibit. Each of these scenarios presents a problem to the exhibition who is trying to tell their story without losing the interest of their intended audience. For me personally, I relate more to the skimming of the narrative so that I can see as much as possible wherever I go. Sometimes I might miss something that the exhibition is trying to tell with their story, but that is what makes historical sites amazing and daunting at the same time. What can the storyteller do to punctuate their narrative and keep their audience captivated? That is the essence of public history. Public history is a growing field and the subdiscipline of history itself. For myself, after visiting hundreds of historical sites around the world, the goal for me personally is to enter that site with an open mind and an open attitude about what that specific historical site is trying to convey to me and to its audience. During this video, I have tried to demonstrate that the story is paramount in the scheme of your historical site exhibition. Your target audience should be a collaboration between historians and academia, with an emphasis on ethical and factual information that tells the story that the exhibition wants to tell. There must be some sort of compromise without endangering the integrity of the narrative. Be open, be willing to experience the narrative from different perspectives, and you might succeed in engaging the audience that you were targeting. May you all have a blessed day.